Trump needs to put the left in its place. And I know there's a lot of talk about the downsides of using power. Theory cells like this, Curtis Yarvin just wrote a whole thing about this kind of stuff. I get that. It is a valid perspective. I don't mean to dismiss that. Any serious right-wing guy should at least be familiar with that perspective. It is true, sometimes you can use power in ways that are counterproductive, obviously. However, there are also absolutely instances where it is counterproductive to not use power when it is necessary to use power. I believe this is one of those cases. If the left is allowed to run wild, it is only going to embolden them. These are people who are entropic by nature, and it's going to just create more public resistance to mass deportations. Everything's just going to get uglier. Whereas if the Trump administration cracks down on this criminal resistance, which it is, Stephen Miller says it's little more than domestic terrorism. So true, Stephen Miller. The left is going to realize that it's not winning. It's going to lose energy. These people are paper tigers. Like, if the average left-wing dysgenic freak is scared to interfere with ICE, having seen so many of his gay race communist comrades getting arrested, getting pepper sprayed, physically harmed, whatever, he's going to have second thoughts about doing this whole revolutionary LARP. Again, these people are paper tigers. When stuff gets real, what do? Hey! Shame! Shame! That is who we are up against. God has graced us with the best enemies possible. We appreciate that, unironically. Thank you. But you'll have a small subset of the left that, of course, is going to grow, emboldened by this. You do have your radicals. You always have, no matter what the Trump administration does to crush the kind of, broader dissent, which is, causing probably at that point most of these problems. But I think that number is going to dwindle over time, too. I mean, where was the resistance, right, when Trump won in 2024? You remember when Trump won in 2017? 2016, they had fires in DC, literally police cars, or maybe it wasn't police cars, it was a limo or something. They were burning stuff in DC at the inauguration. Where was that in 2024? Where were all of the Antifa riots during his campaign rallies? What about after he won, throughout the city? Where was our women's march? The energy just is not there. The radical left, of course, is still around because these people are on welfare. They're taking hormones. Their job is to be that, right? Those people are going to stick around until they sort of, we'll say the problem kind of solves itself. These people are, they're not doing too well and we'll pray for them. But, we just kind of have to, it's a waiting game in some cases. But they do maintain a sort of presence, right? However, it's not as prominent as it used to be. That is good. As it would turn out, you actually win by winning. It's crazy. You win by simply outlasting your enemies, by simply never surrendering, by grinding them down until they lose the will to fight. They can't even make eye contact with a waitress when they order. They are not a people who are able to fight. They are only emboldened because they have the entire power apparatus behind them. But absent that, when pressure is applied, they have nothing. And some, including, of course, myself, have floated this silly little thing called the Insurrection Act as a potential solution to this sort of chaos on the streets, right? And that's not anything out of the ordinary. The minute any sign of left-wing unrest appears on the horizon, conservatives like to immediately begin this kind of talk, right? We must invoke the Insurrection Act. I don't blame them. The very name of the act is awesome. It totally applies to exactly what we're talking about with these deranged left-wing freaks who choose to employ violence in this crusade for churning out kids, opening up the borders, anti-white racism, all of that, right? But what is the Insurrection Act anyway? It is an amalgamation of laws introduced in the 18th and 19th centuries, and essentially it allows for the deployment of U.S. troops within the United States to carry out civilian law enforcement duties, which is, of course, something normally forbidden by existing law going back to the late 19th century. And under this act, states can request federal assistance in putting down a rebellion, but it also provides the federal government with authority to dispatch troops to a state, even when that state doesn't want them there, which is kind of epic. And this is how Presidents Eisenhower and Kennedy were able to send in the military to desegregate schools in the South and stick bayonets in people's backs because of freaking equality, which is, of course, an effort that I think is fantastic. Equality, again, we are talking about the editorial position of the John Doyle Show. That is one of our three things. It's on our seal. And so the Insurrection Act only allows U.S. troops to do that, in the enforcement of federal law. Or a very small subset of state laws, such as, civil rights laws, whatever. The immigration laws that Trump is trying to enforce, including, attacks on federal agents, all that stuff, that certainly applies. But that's a separate question from, should we do that right now? Should we use our TAC nuke? Would it be wise? Is it even necessary for him to invoke the Insurrection Act for this right now? It depends on how things play out. I know that the easiest thing for me to do right now would be to take the position of, hey, you know how we're all like really angry because we have to see footage of annoying people like threatening our boys? Let's just like arrest them all right now. Let's go full Insurrection Act, military occupation. Like that would be popular and awesome. Forgive me for trying to have a little bit of a level head here, okay? We have to just look at how things play out. I'm not against using this at all. I'm just saying sometimes you got to know when to hold it. Like, we got to be a little bit forward thinking here and not give in to our more primitive impulses, right? So it depends on how things play out. If the left continues becoming insane, anarchy continues, it ramps up as, the mass deportations continue. If they're literally out there roaming the streets with armed mobs looking for ICE agents to shoot, this has happened before in this country, then yeah, absolutely, it's time for the Insurrection Act. Do it, right? Like, go after these people. However, I don't think it's going to get to that point, and which is good. We don't want it to get to that point. We don't want ICE agents to feel as though their lives are in danger more than they already do. We don't want that kind of stuff happening. That is bad for the continuation and success of the operation. I don't want it to get to that point. So I would imagine that's like the position of most people who are more or less aligned with the direction of this administration. However, the Trump administration also needs to teach leftists not to mess with federal law enforcement. That can be accomplished by beefing up these agencies, instructing them to crack down on the left as much as the law allows. Very legal, very cool, all that stuff. And if Trump invoked the Insurrection Act, I think it would make the federal agents actually doing the deportations look maybe weak, in the sense that, okay, we're bringing in the military to do what they could already do. I don't think it's necessary. I think that we can fix these problems without having to take it there. The ICE agents, thank God, are safe right now. It's the libtards, it's the illegal aliens getting themselves killed. Our guys are more or less okay. They can handle a little bit of intimidation from libtards, from illegal aliens. They've got the training for it. I just don't think we need to bring that in yet. I think that we can embolden our guys to do their jobs, get more manpower, make those arrests, detain these people. Like we are moving in the direction of solving the problem, right? I just don't know that we need to play that card yet. Another thing we have to consider, because we are playing the game of politics, and people like to get excited about stuff and pretend that we're not playing the game of politics. Yes, we are. And doing this would create a PR crisis, because the narrative that is syndicated by everybody ever, including a lot of retards who think that they're on our side, is going to be that Trump's domestic agenda is so unpopular and he doesn't actually have the mandate. And so, because the American people are freaking against mass deportations because these are our freaking brothers, right? That he had to call in the military to impose it upon America. And that's not the case, of course, but that is how it would be perceived. Like, this is unpopular. He doesn't have the popular mandate, and so we had to bring the military in to enforce this top down. Remember what I said about the power of narratives? They don't have to be true. They just have to be compelling. And people, as you may know, are primed to believe in that sort of freaking evil military occupation, freaking Hunger Games rise up. Like, that is what people want to believe about the Trump admin. They're already kind of believing that, but we still more or less have people on our side. The approval ratings doing well, mass deportation efforts going well. I'm just saying, you get one shot with this. And one of the rules of politics is you never want to become what your enemy has primed people to perceive you as. There's this popular impulse to say, well, they're going to call us that anyway, so let's just do it. Let's just take it there. You don't want to do that. It's not so much about trying to convince libtards who are obviously insane and personhood is maybe even in question at this moment. You are trying to take people who are maybe a little bit more moderate, who are sympathetic to your ideas, who could be useful to your cause, who support you with and maybe even need in some cases. You don't want to give those people who are certainly tuned in at least a little bit to that propaganda, you don't want to give those people permission to write you off. That is not good. And so I'm going to take this extremely controversial position, which is that I don't think at this time right now when I'm recording this, I'm not going to tell you when I'm recording this, it's top secret. The viewer decides his own experience. I don't think it's necessary right now, at least not yet. We will see how things play out. I don't know how far they are willing to take this. I know how far the extreme people are willing to take this, but in terms of these kinds of things, I just don't think it's going to get to the point that we need the Insurrection Act. If I'm king, would I like to deploy it anyway? Because that'd be hilarious. Like maybe, but I'm talking about right now. I don't think that it's. Don't get mad at me on the internet. I don't see it. I think that we're working in a good direction, and I think it's important to keep it in the back pocket for future use, which I completely would be okay with were it to get to that point. If it's these lesbian wives, soy jack, millennial Redditors screaming out, illegal child molesters, these kinds of people, if they get a little bit too out of hand, Absolutely. Calling the U.S. military, problem solved. I have absolutely no problem with that. I would sleep even more soundly at night than I already do, knowing that Trump was executing those orders. So let's just hope he doesn't have to use it, because again, if he's using it, that would sort of imply that things have gotten a lot worse, which means that probably ICE agents are now actually being killed, and that would be very bad. We don't want to see that. If that happens, obviously bring in the military, put these people down. But right now, things seem to more or less be working, and I think that we have resources, manpower, whatever, that's going to make that continue to work.